We continue now at the top of Daf Chavdalad Amud Beis Mesechet Sanhedrin. This is Sanhedrin Daf 24b. This Daf is sponsored by David Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you'd like to sponsor an Amud or a Daf, see the description box below and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amud, Rava said that the machlokas in the Mishnah, with regards to a case where a person says, I accept my father, let's say, or your father, as one of the judges, so there's a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim, whether or not the person can then retract and say he does not accept the father as a judge. So that machlokas, according to Rav, is only talking about a situation of etein lach, meaning it's talking where the nitva is the one that initially accepts the father as the judge. However, by the toveya, by a case of macholach, where the toveya is saying that I accept him as a judge in terms of my claim, so then it's macholach. Then he's essentially saying that I forgive it, I'm not going to collect it from you in a situation if he rules against me. So over there, according to Rava, everybody agrees that the toveya by macholach is not able to retract. And so the Gemara asks a question from the end of the Mishnah. At the end of the Mishnah, we also have a machlokas tanoim, and the machlokas tanoim over there is by a shvua situation, where one of the litigants says, you don't have to take a regular shvua, just take a kind of a neder, b'chaye roshcha, so can he retract that? And the Gemara now says, my lav is not talking, but ozan hanishboin v'lo meshalmin. Aren't we talking about the cases where people take shvuas in order not to pay? The havelei kemacholach, that's the same as macholach. That would be similar to a situation of a toveya when it comes to money, when it comes to actually collecting money. And so therefore you see there is a machlokas, even by a situation of macholach. That's a question against Rava. And the Gemara says, not necessarily, lo no, but osan hanishboin v'nolin. There are cases where people take shvuas in order to collect. The havelei ke'etein lach, because that's the same as etein lach, so it could be that that's the machlokas at the end of the Mishnah. And Rashi explains, "Ba'osan hanishboin liftor atzman shelo yishlamu." Aren't we talking where they're taking a shvu in order to exempt themselves that they don't have to pay? The toveya kamer, meaning to say, the toveya is saying dorli v'ani mochelach. Essentially, in that case, he's saying dorli, just take this kind of a neder, and I will be mochel. It's a situation of mochel. If you take that, then I'll be mochel, and you won't have to pay. And then the Gemara said, no, hanishboin v'notlin. There are cases of hanishboin v'notlin, hasacher v'hanigzal v'chayotze, v'han cases of sacher and nigzal. In these kinds of cases, the nitva kamerle, the person being claimed from, is saying, dorli, you take this neder ve'etein lach, and then I will give to you, and so therefore it's not a proof against Rava. But the Gemara continues, v'atana le reisha, but if that's the case, the reisha and the seifa of the Mishnah are exactly the same case. As Rashi says, v'atana le reisha, du'uk misla be'etein lach, you're saying that the reisha is also a case of etein lach, v'tarti lamali, so what do you have to have two cases that seem to be identical? And the Gemara answers to that, reisha tana tola b'das acherim, the reisha of the Mishnah is talking about where it's das acherim, where it's other people who are making the decisions. V'tana tola b'das atzmo, and then you also have a case of das atzmo, where it's he himself. Rashi explains, tola b'das acherim abba v'yavicha. In the case of the reish of the Mishnah, there we're talking about the father, his father, or the other person's father are going to be a judge. That person is going to be making the determination in terms of whether he's chayiv. But then you also have b'das atzmo shel chaveiro baldin. Then you have the case of the seifa. There he's allowing the baldin, the other litigant. We're not talking about someone else, some judge deciding something. We're talking about the litigant deciding something. And so you have a machlokas in both of these cases, again, whether the person is able to retract or not. And the Gemara continues and explains, utzricha, and it's necessary to have both cases of das acherim and das atzmo. The tana tola b'das acherim, if we only had the case of tola b'das acherim, b'hakam Rabbi Meir, dematzi hadarbe, maybe only over there, Rabbi Meir says he can take it back and retract. Mishum delo gamaru makni, because in that case, he really was not wholeheartedly giving it. Diyamar miyemer demizakile, he says, who says exactly what's going to happen? We don't know what the conclusion will be. Avol tola b'das atzmo, but in a case where he's just telling the other litigant, you should take this neder, so ema modi lul rabbanan, so there already maybe he would admit to the rabbanan, because there already the person understands for sure he's going to take that neder. He understands what the end result is going to be, so there maybe Rabbi Meir would agree that there's no retracting in a situation where you're just allowing someone to be a judge. He doesn't know what the final determination of the case is going to be, and so therefore he's not wholeheartedly giving it away, so to speak, and that's why in that case Rabbi Meir says you can retract. And you go the other way as well, v'yashmin and baha, if you only had that case, baha kami rabbanan, maybe only in the situation of a shua, the rabbanan say you can't retract, avol bahi, but in the reish of the Mishnah, ema module rabbanan Rabbi Meir, maybe the rabbanan would admit to Rabbi Meir that he could retract, so tzricha, that's why it's necessary to have both cases. And the Gemara continues, Amar Reish Lakish says, Machlokes lifnei gemar din. The whole machlokes in the mission of whether he can retract or not, that's before there's a final verdict. Aval yachar gemar din, but after the verdict, divrei hakol and yachol achzer, well, everybody agrees it's too late, he's not able to retract. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan says, Liachar gemar din machlokes. The machlokes is after the verdict whether he can retract or not. And the Gemara asks, they had the following question, La'achar gemar din machlokes. Does Rabbi Yochanan mean to say that the machlokes is only la'achar gemar din, it's only after the verdicts? Aval ifnei gemar din divrei hakol yachol lachzor bo, but before the verdict everybody agrees he can retract. O dilmar, maybe bein bazu machlokus, maybe the machlokus between Rabbi Meir and the Rabbanan is in both cases, it's both la'achar gemar din and lifnei gemar din. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, come in here the following proof. The Amar Rava, because Rava says, Kibel olav karov apostle. Let's say he accepted upon himself that there should be a relative, or there should be someone else that is disqualified, and again, that he wants to retract later on. Lefnei gemar din yachol lachzor bo. So if it's before the verdict, he's able to retract. Liachar gemar din ein yachol lachzor bo. But after the verdict, he cannot retract. And so the Gemara says, Yamrid bishlama, liachar gemar din machlokas. Now, if you're going to say correctly that liachar gemar din, the machlokas, only occurs after the verdict, that's where there's a machlokas tanoim whether he can retract or not. Avol lifnei gemar din, but before the verdict, divrei hakol yachol achzer bo. So then everybody agrees he's able to retract. So then we understand what Rava is saying. Rava da'amar ka Rabbi Yochanan, because then Rava is following Rabbi Yochanan, meaning to say what Rabbi Yochanan said was that liachar gemar din machlokas, but lifnei gemar din everybody agrees he is able to retract, which is exactly what Rava said. Rava said lifnei gemar din he's able to retract, and liachar gemar din, like the Rabbanon, he's not able to retract. Rav is following Rabbi Yochanan v'aliba de Rabbanon, and he's paskening like the Rabbanon. Elo yamrid bein bazu machlokas. But if you're going to say that the machlokas between the Rabbanon and Rabbi Meir, that Rabbi Yochanan meant to say the machlokas is both lifnei gemar din and liachar gemar din, and you're following the Chachamim, so then you should follow the Chachamim in both cases, whether lifnei gemar din or liachar gemar din, and you should say he's not able to retract. Why would Rava be making this distinction? Rava damer kaman, then Rava, who exactly is he paskening like? In this situation, Rava is issuing a final ruling. Elalav shmamina, rather don't we see from here, liachar gemar din machlokas, that the machlokas is only liachar gemar din, and the Gemara says shmamina, indeed you see that that is the case. And the Gemara continues, Sholach le Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda, some have bar Rav Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda sent Rav Nachman bar Yaakov. He sent Rav Nachman bar Yaakov with the following question. Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us our Rebbe, lifnei gemar din machlokas, or liachar gemar din machlokas, is the machlokas before the verdict or after the verdict in the Mishnah in terms of whether he can retract. V'halacha kedivrei mi, and who does the halacha follow in terms of this machlokas tanoim between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim? Sholach le, he sent back to him, la'achar gemar din machlokas, the machlokas is after the verdict. The halacha kedivrei chachamim. The halacha is like the chachamim, that he is not able to retract. Rav Ashi says, Hachi shalach lei, this is what he sent him. Be'etein lach machlokas, or b'machalach machlokas. Is the machlokas by etein lach or machalach? Again, is the machlokas where the toveya, was it the toveya or the nitva, the one who said that he accepts, let's say, the father as a judge? V'halacha kedivrei mi, and the halacha follows who? Shalach lei sent him, be'etein lach machlokas. The machlokas is by etein lach, v'halacha kedivrei chachamim, and the halacha is like the Chachamim, again, you can't retract. Besura Masniyachi, the above way of learning it, that was how it was taught in Sura. Bepumbedisa Masniyachi, and Pumbedisa was as follows. Amar Rav Chanina bar Shalmia, Rav Chanina bar Shalmia said, Sholchu lei mibei Rav l'Shmuel, they sent from the yeshiva of Rav to Shmuel, Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us Rabbeinu, lifnei gemar din, v'kanu miyadomai. What would be the halacha before the verdict? But they made a kinyan. It wasn't only that he accepted, let's say, the father as a judge, but he made a kinyan that that's what he was going to accept. Shalach Lui sent back to them, ein lachar kinyan klum. After a kinyan is made already there for sure, there is no retracting. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, Ve'elohein hapsul, and the following are disqualified from being witnesses. Hamisachik bekuvya, those who play with dice for money. V'hamalve beribis, those who lend for interest. Umafricha yonim, and those who fly pigeons. V'sochre shvius, and merchants with produce of shvius. Amar Rav Shimon says, B'tchila ha'yukornos on osvei shvius. Originally they would call them gatherers of shvius. Misharabu ha'anosin, but when the coercers, when they increased, chazru l'kroson sochre shvius, then they called them sochre shvius, merchants of shvius. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Amosai, when is this true? Bisman she'ein lehen umnus elahu. We only disqualify these individuals when this is their only profession. For example, their only profession is this gambling. Avol yesh lehen umnus shelo, but if they have some other profession, ksheira, and then they are allowed to be witnesses. And Rashi explains, Ve'elohen apsulim, the following are disqualified, lodun ulahoid, we're talking about both to be judges and to be witnesses. Hamesachik bekuvya kulu mefarish begemara, those who play with dice, they'll all be explained in the Gemara. Vekulan me'ein gazlonin hein, all of the cases in this Mishnah, they're sort of like thieves. V'hatorah amra al tashes rasha aid, v'chol shekein dayan, and the pasuk says you can't be a rasha and be a witness, and certainly you can't be a judge. V'sochrei shvius, and again merchants of produce from the Shemitah year. Hoel v'chimud mammon, since they're desire for money, ma'aviru al divrei Torah, is causing them to violate the words of the Torah. Havale karasha dechamas, so that's like a wicked person in terms of monetary issues. Upasal ladun elahayd, is disqualified from judging and from testifying. Shenot achrei abetza, because he's trying to get profit, he'll use all means in order to profit. And then the Mishnah said again, originally they called them gatherers of shvius, but then when the anasin, when the coercers, that refers to tax collectors, when they increase, so then they called them sochrei shvius. Rashi says betchila hayakorna some mefarsh Gemara. This will all be explained in the Gemara. And finally, Rabbi Yehuda said this is only true if this is his only profession. She'ein lo umnas elahu, this is the only profession. Tehoel vein asukin b'yeshuva shalolem, since they're not busy, they're not dealing with the normal way of living in the world. Einan bekian betiv dinan umasumatan, so they don't really know the laws of business. Ve'enan yirechet, and they don't fear sin. And the Gemara says, Mesachik bekuvya maiko oven, when a person is playing with dice, what's wrong, what's he doing? Amar Rami Bar Chama says, Mishum dahavi asmachta, this is considered to be an asmachta, the asmachta lo kanya, asmachta is not a good kinyan. Rashi explains, Asmachta hainu davar de'eno nosein lo midaito ela somech al davar she'eno. This is a situation where a person is not really giving the money willingly. He's thinking of something that didn't happen. Desavar shehu yachol l'natzayach upamim shemenatzcheno. So the only reason he's playing is because he thinks he's going to win at the gambling. Sometimes he loses. That's considered a case of an asmachta, which is not a real kinyan, and that's why it's a problem of stealing. And the Gemara continues with another explanation of what the problem is by Mesachik bekuvya. Rav Sheshes Amar, Rav Sheshes says, Kolki agavna lav asmachta, in a situation of gambling where you have no idea what the result is going to be, that's not considered an asmachta. The person is perfectly aware that he might lose the gamble. El lefisha ein asukin b'yeshuva shalolam. Rather, the reason why the Mesachik bekuvya is not able to be a witness is because, again, he doesn't deal in the normal manner of business of the world. And Rashi explains, Kolki agavna lav asmachti ve'echi dami asmachta kagon dim over v'lo avid ashalim b'meitzva ukagon mashlish ashtaro to get pashat. The somech alo davar, the savar calls it biyadi lasos. And asmachta is a situation where the person thinks that he does have control of the result. He's not expecting to lose. In those cases, if he does lose, that's an asmachta. That's not a real kinyan. That wasn't his intention. When he originally made whatever stipulation he made, he was thinking he never have to pay. He made a mistake and thought it's not going to happen. But over here, he's not relying on anything when he's gambling with dice. He has no idea if he's going to win or not. Nevertheless, he's making this bet. He's making the stipulation. You see that he's fully committing, even though because of the factor, despite the fact that he doesn't know. Gamar v'akni, he's still going to give it away if he loses. V'lo gezeli, therefore, situations of gambling in this fashion would not be considered gezela. And the Gemara continues, Mai beinayu, what's the difference between the approach of Rami Bar Chama, who says the issue of Mesachik bekuvya is asmachta, and Rav Sheshes, who says the issue is ein asukin b'yeshuva shalolam. The Gemara says, Ika beinayu, the Gamar umnasa achrisi. The difference between them is let's say he does have another profession. According to Rami Bar Chama, it's still asmachta, and asmachta lokanya, it's still stealing, and he would still be disqualified. But according to Rav Sheshes, he does have another profession that's considered asukin b'yeshuva shalolam. He is dealing with the settling of the world. And the Gemara continues, Ditnan, as we learned in our Mishnah, Amar Rav Yehuda says, Eimasai, when is all this true that he's disqualified? Bisman shein len umnus, when he doesn't have another profession. Elahu, this is his only profession is gambling. Aval yesh len umnus shalo, but if he has some other profession, so then ksherim, then they're kosher in terms of testifying. And alma, so the Gemara says, we see the time of the Masnisin, Mishum Yeshuva Shalolamu, don't we see that the reason of the Mishnah is because of the settling of the world? And that seems to support exactly Rav Sheshes, and so Kasha Rami Bar Chama, the Gemara says, isn't Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah a kasha against Rami Bar Chama? And the Gemara says, V'chitema pligi Rabbana led Rabbi Yehuda. Now maybe you'll say that that's just Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, but the Rabbanan actually disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. But V'hama Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, but Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Kol mokom shama Rabbi Yehuda, anytime Rabbi Yehuda uses this kind of language in the Mishnah, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Hey Amud Aleph.